Man, I was absolutely blown away. You can't put into words what that was like to see Van Hamburger win the whole thing there in Chicago. Joey Logano poked some fun at the end because no one could catch him. I mean, he's consistently putting up better lap times in the entire field, and NASCAR overtime almost messed him up, but we're glad it didn't. He was able to overcome that and drive away again. And I'm sure he would have been able to do that even if it was double overtime. He would just drive away again. What a show for Shane van Gisbergen. Of course, that name is no stranger to us here on Grid Network. We hear it plenty of times on the other shows. But yeah, you're right, Ben. We don't really hear it much here on the Encore side, but that's probably going to change. That's huge there for the Australian V8 Supercar champion to come in your first start and take the victory. And I'm just blown away that it's happened on the 75th year of the sport and how long it's been since someone's been able to do it successfully. You never hear about things like that. And it would only take someone with a champion talent coming to Project 91 to be able to get that done. And Shane van Gisbergen's your guy.
It was probably one of the most shocking wins and I think the last time somebody told me in a chat that I'm in, I think said either McDowell's Daytona 500 or AJ's win at the Indy Road Course. But yeah, it's that was. But if you watched practice, you would know that car was fast. But just the way that event happened, and we'll obviously get more into that as we get along into the show. But again, it doesn't really surprise me. Nothing surprises me in this sport. Well, some things do, but yeah, just what a win yesterday for Shane van Gisbergen, or how many times and how many pronunciations of that last name that we saw throughout. Being pronounced by several different people, but yeah, that was fun.
Just to drive home the point of how unprecedented this is, I mentioned he's the 7th driver to win in his first start. I've got the stats pulled up right here. Jim Roper, 1949 Charlotte Speedway. That was the first ever NASCAR strictly stock at the time race, which we now know is the Cup Series today. So, of course, whoever won that race, Glenn Dunaway thought he was going to win that race and then had it taken away from him through disqualification. But that's the first ever race right there for anybody. So whoever won that race was going to have won in their first start. Jack White did it later in 49 at Hamburg. Then Harold Keitem at Daytona Beach in 1950. Leon Sales in 1950 as well at North Wilkesboro. And Marvin Burke in 1951 at Oakland. So the first 5 to do it came really in NASCAR's infancy in the first 3 seasons. And then, as I mentioned, Johnny Rutherford did it in 1963. That was back when the Daytona dual races were points races. They aren't points races today. So if that happened today, that doesn't count. And Shane van Gisbergen does it yesterday, the first in 60 years, the first in the modern era. So needless to say, I mean, to me, this is far and away the most impressive out of all those. I don't want to take away from any of these drivers who won these races back in the day, but NASCAR has totally changed and totally evolved over the last 75 years. Like you're mentioning, Brandon, it's a completely different sport nowadays. And I said when this was first announced, of course, SVG, like if we're trying to do like a fantasy game where we're picking our top 10, I'm certainly going to consider him, and I wouldn't put a top 5 past him either. But to win a race on debut, I know it's kind of a debut for everybody because we've never done a street race before. But thinking that, of course, there's some overlap between the supercars and particularly the next gen car. I really did not expect a win in his debut, though. I mean, it's just unbelievable. And I saw some people say, this isn't a great look for the sport because all these series regulars got showed up by an outsider coming in. And I get what you're saying. I get that side of the argument. I think Chase Elliott certainly gets that side of the argument with some of his post-race comments. But I think it could be partially that, but it's more so what a talented race car driver Shane van Gisbergen is. That, I think, is the main takeaway from this. That this guy can hop in. And remember, he races down under. He's sitting on the other side of the car in the supercars. He mentioned that in his post-race press conference. That was a huge adjustment for him, just trying to get used to the angles of the corners and everything. So, he's certainly made it look easy, but don't think for one second that it is. To hop into a completely different series on a completely different continent and go out and win in your first race is simply unbelievable.
And also, they really stressed the Ricky Rudd camera angle there with Gisbergen, how he's one of the only drivers that's really using the clutch and actually saying that it gives him an advantage with turning the car. And things like that. That's something that none of the other Cup drivers are using because it's not really necessary in this next gen car to be using that clutch pedal. So it was impressive to see that.
A great weekend overall for the sport. Congratulations again to Shane van Gisbergen. Congratulations to NBC as well. I just saw the numbers come out. I think the most watched race on their family network since the 2017 Brickyard 400,
Wow.
if I recall correctly. So a fantastic result there. And I'll just say one more thing before we move on. Congratulations as well to Justin Marks, and thank you everybody at Trackhouse Racing for putting this together. I remember I tweeted as soon as the Project 91 deal was originally announced with Kimi Räikkönen. I went on Twitter and I said Justin Marks is a future Hall of Famer. What he's done with Trackhouse in such a short amount of time. If he keeps up winning at this rate with all these different drivers, there was another stat I saw this weekend that didn't even occur to me. He's won with 3 different drivers from 3 different countries, because you got Daniel Suarez from Mexico, you got Ross Chastain from the United States, you got Shane van Gisbergen from New Zealand. The Project 91 car winning in its only 3rd ever race for that team, everybody working on that car. He might be a future first ballot Hall of Famer if things keep going the way they're going. And he was 250 feet away from a championship last year at Phoenix with Ross Chastain as well. So what Trackhouse Racing has done so young into their history here, so early in their history, I think that deserves a shout out as well. Not just Shane van Gisbergen, obviously he was phenomenal, but the entire Trackhouse team. It's a shame for Justin for his race on Saturday in the colleague car that it came to an early end with the engine failure. Felt bad for him there, but what he's doing as an owner on the Cup side of things is nothing short of incredible. So kudos to everybody at Trackhouse Racing. They've got a phenomenal thing going.